Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we conclude with Part 11, The Symbols and Legends of Masonry, continued. From Ancient Mysteries and Modern Masonry by Charles H. Vail. Lecture 11, The Symbols and Legends of Masonry, continued. In this concluding lecture of the series, we will consider the remaining important symbols and legends of Masonry. Sacred or ineffable name. This symbol was universal in ancient times, for every nation of antiquity had its sacred name or ineffable word. The Hebrew symbol consists of 4 letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, and is called the Tetragrammaton, or 4-lettered word. This word was said to have been communicated by God to Moses at the burning bush. The name was held most sacred by the Jews, but its meaning and proper pronunciation has long been obscured. Before the invention of the Masoretic points, the pronunciation of a word in the Hebrew language could not be known by the characters themselves, so it was easy in the course of time to lose the proper pronunciation. Especially so as at the beginning of the Hellenistic age, the use of the name was reserved for the temple. At the beginning of the Christian era, Philo writes, the 4 letters may be mentioned or heard only by holy men whose ears and tongues are prepared by wisdom, and by no others in any place whatsoever. In the course of time, the pronunciation of the name, even by the temple priests, fell into disuse, and the manner of its pronunciation at length became a secret entrusted only to the few. While the word was being withdrawn from common use, it was pronounced Adonai in the scriptures, and when the vowel points were introduced, those that belonged to Adonai were placed under the Tetragrammaton. The word itself is a symbol. The letters are probably arranged as a blind. As they stand in the Tetragrammaton, they have no significance. They do not represent any real Hebrew word. Now, if we apply the Hebrew method of halving or transposing letters, which was used to conceal the meaning of a word, or rather, if we reverse the process which may have been employed, we get instead of Y, H, V, H, H, V, H, Y. Before the introduction of vowel signs, certain weak consonants such as Yod and Vav were sometimes used to indicate vowel sound. So we frequently see I or E given as an equivalent for Yod and U or O given for Vav. Even Yod is sometimes given as Jod and Vav as War, so we have the name given as a YHVH or IHVH or JHVH or YHWH or IHOH, etc. Now the personal pronouns he and she are written in Hebrew with the signs he, Vav, Aleph, and he, Yod, Aleph. When Aleph terminates a word and has no vowel immediately preceding or following, it is usually dropped. Now if we drop the final Aleph, we have the transposed Tetragrammaton, HVHY, which are the personal pronouns he and she, the male and female, representing the 2 great principles of nature, the dual aspect of the second Logos. Now if we turn to the Kabbalah, which contains some portions of the secret teachings of the Jews, we shall find that this great principle is the exact meaning of the Tetragrammaton. It does not represent the absolute deity or the unmanifested Logos, but it does represent the manifested, the first emanation, Adam Kadmon. The 2 aspects of being which are potential in the first Logos become manifested in the later stages of evolution. This name represents the 4 worlds, Al-Seluth, signified by Yod, Briah by He, Yazirah by Vav, and Azayah by the second He. The source of the Tetragrammaton is absolute deity, Ein Sof, the causeless cause. The Tetragrammaton is also the Sephiroth, which are 10 in number and emanate one from the other. The highest is Kether, the crown. Then comes Chokmah and Bina, the male and female principles. From these emanate the other 7. The very fact that the meaning of the Tetragrammaton is identical with the words obtained by transposing the letters is sufficient evidence that the word was really HV, or WUOHY or JIE, according to the equivalents adopted for the signs, whether interpreted as consonants or vowels, and the names given to the signs. The meaning and pronunciation of the word was carefully guarded. There is no hint given in the ritual for this secrecy, but there is a scientific reason, for the mystic word has to do with the science of rhythmic vibrations, which is the key to the equilibrium of all forces. In all mysticism, the knowledge of names meant the possession of powers. The spoken name gave one the power of the name. It is interesting to note how the Jews worked this idea into their system. In the Talmud, the wonderful works of Jesus are ascribed to his use of the sacred name. According to early traditions, the knowledge whereby he wrought these works was learned in Egypt, but in the developed Toldeth, the word of power was the holy name, the tetragrammaton. All nations of antiquity had their sacred names, which were words of power. These names were formed by taking a letter which conveyed a meaning and adding other letters, each having a meaning. The whole word thus formed, constituting a sacred name or word which contained some great truth. These names were words of power, for as the unfolding consciousness realizes one truth after another and becomes that truth, it rules. In Persia, the sacred name was HOM, in India AUM, in Scandinavia IOW, in Greece IAO, etc. The rite of circumambulation. This rite again connects Freemasonry with the ancient mysteries. It consists in a formal procession around the altar and originally alluded to the apparent course of the sun, which is from east to west. In ancient Greece, the priests during the rites of sacrifice walked 3 times around the altar while chanting a sacred hymn, which was divided into 3 parts, and each part was to be sung at a particular point in the procession. The analogy between this practice of the ancients and the recitations of a passage of scripture in the Masonic circumambulation is quite apparent. In making this circuit, it was considered necessary that the right side should always be next to the altar, and so the procession moved from west to the north, then east, south, west, and then to the north again. We find the same rite among the Romans, Druids, and Hindus. In all these ceremonies they were imitating the example of the sun and following his beneficent course. The legend of the winding stairs. This legend is connected with the fellow craft degree. It is based upon 1 Kings 6:8. The door for the middle chamber was in the right side of the house, and they went up with winding stairs into the middle chamber and out of the middle into the third. Out of this slender material, says Dr. Mackey, has been constructed an allegory which, if properly considered in its symbolical relations, will be found to be of surpassing beauty. But it is only as a symbol that we can regard this whole tradition, for the historical facts and the architectural details alike forbid us for a moment to suppose that the legend, as it is rehearsed in the 2nd degree of Masonry, is anything more than a magnificent philosophical myth. The Symbolism of Freemasonry, Mackey, page 215. The lesson which this legend teaches is not difficult to discover. Freemasonry is a speculative science which has for its object the investigation of divine truth. The candidate is in search of more light, and as all the ceremonies denote a progress from a lower to a higher state, he is always progressing. This fundamental symbolism of Masonry is found in each degree. There is the mystical ladder, the ceremony of circumambulation, the restoration to life, etc. The legend of the winding stairs symbolizes the same fact, the ascent of man from ignorance to knowledge, from darkness to light, from death to life. The steps of the winding stairs commenced on the porch of the temple. This indicates the beginning of the Masonic life, the preparation for entering the temple. It is curious to note that the number of steps in all the systems has been odd. This probably is due to the fact that the symbolism of numbers was borrowed from Pythagoras, in whose system of philosophy the odd numbers were regarded as sacred, though the number of steps has greatly varied. Tracing boards have been found in which only 5 steps are represented, and others which denote 7. At one time in England, the number was 38, which was reduced to 37. And in this country, the number has been reduced to 15. Perhaps 5 would be the more appropriate, as the stairs only extended to the middle chamber. The number 7, corresponding to the number of rounds in the mystic ladder, would indicate the attainment of perfection, the Holy of Holies. We might say that the complete stairs are composed of 7 steps, 3 carrying the candidate into the ground floor of the temple, 2 into the middle, and 2 into the inner sanctuary. The general symbolism of the legend is not affected by the number of steps or the method of division. The candidate who succeeds in climbing the winding stairs will receive his reward. What is the reward or wages of the speculative Mason? Not silver nor gold, but truth. Yet the whole of divine truth cannot be imparted to the fellow craft. The middle chamber, then, where he receives his wages, is symbolical of the fellow craft degree, and the wages are appropriate to the degree of his progress. To again quote Dr. Mackey, "It is then as a symbol and a symbol only that we must study this beautiful legend of the winding stairs. If we attempt to adopt it as an historical fact, the absurdity of its details stares us in the face, and wise men will wonder at our credulity. Its inventors had no desire thus to impose upon our folly, but offering it to us as a great philosophical myth, they did not for a moment suppose that we would pass over its sublime moral teachings to accept the allegory as an historical narrative, without meaning and wholly irreconcilable with the records of Scripture, and opposed by all the principles of probability. To suppose that 80,000 craftsmen were weekly paid in the narrow precincts of the temple chambers is simply to suppose an absurdity. Page 226. We must guard against the materialization of our allegories and symbols. Remember, Masonry is a system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. To regard the myths as history is to miss the truth which the symbols were designed to teach. No intelligent Mason will fall into this error. The Hiram Legend and the Master's Degree. The Hiram Legend and the Master's Degree are derived from the Mysteries. They are the latest expression of the old sun myth and the ancient rite. Dr. Mackey, in speaking of the symbol of Hiram, says, "It was evidently borrowed from the pagan mysteries where Bacchus, Adonis, Proserpina, and a host of other apotheosized beings play the same role that Hiram does in the Masonic mysteries." Page 20. I've given various forms of these legends, the Osiris, Attis, Hu, Balder, and others. In each of them, the hero of the myth dies or is deprived of life, is laid away in the tomb, and rises again from the grave. This ceremony was called the mystical death and resurrection. The legend represents the activity of the Logos in the cosmos and the mystic life of the initiate. The ancient legends and symbols always have a double meaning and sometimes more. The lectures on true initiation set forth in detail the two aspects of the sun myth, the mythic and the mystic. To the uninitiated, the cosmic or mythic aspect of the legend was the only one seen. Thus, the rites were supposed by them merely to typify the death and resurrection of some hero or demigod, as Osiris, Mithra, Attis, Adonis, Tammuz, etc. And so the sun was worshipped under these titles. Perhaps this was natural enough, for the visible sun was a symbol not only of the Logos, the spiritual sun, but also of the initiate. The yearly course of the sun represented in one aspect the mystic life of the initiate. You will recall that in the Hindu mysteries, when the candidate reached the south in his circuits, he said, "I copy the example of the sun and follow his beneficent course." This example was not merely external. The sun is a symbol of the Logos, and its yearly course typifies the work of the Logos, so that he candidate, by representing the sun and following his course, is really following the example of the Logos. The sun myth typifying both the activity of the Logos and the mystic life of the initiate. In the true mysteries, the rites symbolized the various stages of this mystic life. Complete mastery over the lower nature was typified by placing the candidate in a trance and laying him away in a sepulchre for 3 days and nights. In the pseudo-mysteries, the aspirant was confined in a cell in his normal state and kept there in fear and darkness, that he might reflect on the seriousness of the step taken and be better prepared to receive the mysterious truths bequeathed from the ancient days. This was the symbolical death, the deliverance from which was called the resurrection. While confined in his cell, the search for the hero was made and his body finally found. The Master Mason will here see the source of the Hiram Legend and the Master's Degree. I'm not permitted to say more. Neither is it necessary, for those who are qualified will understand. Mr. Singleton, 33rd degree, after describing the mystical death in the ancient mysteries, says, "The intelligent Mason will from this discover the origin of the rites in the 3rd degree of symbolic Masonry and the 5th and 31st degrees, ancient and accepted Scottish rite. The mysteries in all their forms were funereal. They celebrated the mystical death and revivification of some individual by the use of emblems, symbols, and allegorical representations." History of Freemasonry and Concordant Orders, page 73. Mr. Singleton is here in error in regard to the purpose of the mysteries, if he means that they merely celebrated the mystical death and resurrection of some one individual. The ceremonies of initiation symbolized the progress of the human soul, and the mystical death and resurrection were experienced by every initiate. Perhaps in the latter days of the mysteries, when no true initiation took place, the ceremonies may have been considered as symbolizing the experiences of some special individual, but such was not the case in the true mysteries. We see thus that the story of Hiram is but a variation of the ancient and universal legend in which Osiris, Adonis, Dionysus, Balder, Hu, and many more have played the principal part. Some call Hiram a mythical symbol. This is true, but he is also a mystical symbol. Mythically, Hiram is the sun, a symbol of the Logos. Mystically, he is the perfect initiate, the Grand Master. The myth was not intended to add to the facts of history, but, as De Witte points out, to illustrate a philosophical or religious truth. We must here utter a protest against the sectarian interpretation of the Master Mason's degree. It is true that the degree embraces the inner truths of Christianity in common with all the mystic teaching. But the origin of the degree and all its symbols and legends were derived from the ancient mysteries, and to call the degree a Christian institution, as do Hutchinson and Oliver, is erroneous. Dr. Mackey, in speaking of this tendency to Christianize Masonry, says, "We find Christian Masonic writers indulging in it almost to an unwarrantable excess, and by the extent of their sectarian interpretations materially affecting the cosmopolitan character of the institution." This tendency to Christianization has, in some instances, been so universal and has prevailed for so long a period that certain symbols and myths have been in this way so deeply and thoroughly imbued with the Christian element as to leave those who have not penetrated into the cause of this peculiarity in doubt whether they should attribute to the symbol an ancient or a modern and Christian origin. It is in this way that Masonry has, by a sort of inevitable process, when we look to the religious sentiment of the interpreters, been Christianized. I do not object to the system when the interpretation is not strained. All that I contend for is that such interpretations are modern and that they do not belong to, although they may often be deduced from, the ancient system. The Symbolism of Freemasonry, Mackey, pages 238-246. The sprig of acacia. In all the ancient mysteries, there were sacred plants which were symbols of initiation. The myrtle was used in the mysteries of Greece, the areca in the Egyptian mysteries, the mistletoe in the Druidical mysteries, the lotus in the Indian rites, the lettuce in the mysteries of Adonis, etc. Masonry has borrowed this custom from the ancients and adopted the acacia, which was sacred among the Hebrews, as its mystic symbol. The acacia was a sacred tree which grew abundantly in the vicinity of Jerusalem. The sanctuary of the tabernacle and the holy ark were constructed from this wood, and the tree ever afterwards was regarded as sacred. This symbol has several meanings, but for our purpose we need mention only the primary and original meaning, which is initiation, and its use as a symbol of immortality and innocence. These are closely connected and must be considered together to get the full meaning of the symbol. In olden days, initiation was based upon innocence, that is, upon purity of life, and the initiation brought a realization of immortality. The rite of discalceation. This rite refers to the act of uncovering the feet on approaching holy ground. It is a symbol of reverence and was a common practice among all the nations of antiquity. The priests always offered sacrifices with uncovered feet. Pythagoras instructed his disciples to offer sacrifices and worship with their shoes off. The Mohammedans, when about to perform their devotions, always leave their slippers at the door of the mosque. The Druids practiced the same custom whenever they celebrated the sacred rites. The Peruvians also left their shoes on the porch when they entered the temple. Dr. Oliver tells us that the same usage prevailed equally in India and the islands to the west of Europe, and even the American savages thought that uncovering the feet while in the act of devotion was a sublime method of paying honor to the deity. Signs and Symbols, Oliver, page 153. The Jewish lawgivers adopted this sign of reverence, and the symbolism has descended to us. The application of the symbol to the third degree is well known to every Mason. The stone of foundation. This is the most important symbol of the Royal Arch degree. It must not be confounded with any of the other stone symbols, such as the cornerstone, the keystone, or the capestone. In the first place, we need to understand that the symbol is purely allegorical. To accept it in a literal sense will present, as Dr. Mackey says, absurdities and puerilities. which would not occur if the stone of foundation was received as it really is, as a philosophical myth, conveying a most profound and beautiful symbolism. Read in this spirit, as all the legends of Masonry should be read, the mythical story of the stone of foundation becomes one of the most important and interesting of all the Masonic symbols. The symbolism of Freemasonry, page 283. We have not time to trace the legendary history of the stone of foundation. Probably more legends are connected with this stone than with any other Masonic symbol. The Masonic legends of the stone of foundation, like nearly all that are of Jewish origin, are derived from the Jewish Talmud and owe their origin to the imaginative genius of the Talmudic writers. But there is this difference between Talmudists and Masons. The former accept all these traditions with their puerilities, anachronisms, and absurdities as historical, while the intelligent Mason receives them as allegories. It would be interesting, did space permit, to give in full these rabbinical reveries and also the Masonic traditions based upon them, but I can only outline the tradition. The Talmudic legends tell us that Enoch built a subterranean temple on Mount Moriah, consisting of 9 vaults situated beneath each other and communicating by apertures left in each vault. In the lowest arch he deposited a cubical stone called afterwards the stone of foundation, on which had been inscribed the ineffable name of God. He then made a door of stone with a ring in it and placed it over the opening of the uppermost arch and covered it so that it could not be seen. In the destruction of the world by the deluge, all trace of the subterranean temple was lost. But when David was digging for the foundation of the temple, he discovered in the lowest depths of the excavation a certain stone on which the name of God was inscribed. This stone he removed and deposited in the Holy of Holies. It was a favorite theory of the Talmud legend makers that David laid the foundation upon which Solomon built the temple. The Masonic tradition is substantially the same as the rabbinical, except that it substitutes Solomon for David as the discoverer of the stone and makes him deposit it in the crypt of the temple, where it remained until the foundation of the second temple was laid, when it was discovered and placed in the Holy of Holies. These legends, in the light of historical narratives, would be, as Lee says, so many idle and absurd conceits as facts, but as allegories they contain an important symbolism. The symbolism and worship of stones in ancient times was almost universal. The Greeks originally used unhewn stones of a cubical form to represent their gods. These consecrated stones were placed before the doors of the houses in Athens, also in front of the temples, in the schools and libraries, and at the corners of the streets. The Thebans worshipped Bacchus under the form of a square stone. Arnobius says that Cybele was represented by a small stone of black color, and Eusebius cites Porphyry as saying that the ancients represented the deity by a black stone because his nature was obscure and inscrutable. The Mohammedans also have a black stone which was formerly worshipped and is still much reverenced by Muslims. The Druids represented their gods by cubical stones, and we also find that the early American races worshipped square stones. These citations are taken from Mackey's Symbolism of Freemasonry. They might easily be extended, but those given will suffice to show that everywhere in the ancient world cubical stones were used as a symbol of the deity. These mystical stones were all symbolic, and the legends connected with them allegories. The Masonic stone and legend are no exceptions. The stone of foundation is but a symbol of the deity. The lost word. The symbol of the lost word and the legend of the search for it embodies the whole design of Freemasonry. The primary object of Freemasonry is the search after divine truth. The word is a symbol of this divine truth, and this truth is the key to the science of the soul. The real master, then, is one learned in the divine science, a Moses to lead the neophyte through a wilderness of experience, from his ignorant self to a knowledge of his true self, a conscious union with God. The symbolism of the lost word may be applied to the degradation of the ancient mysteries which resulted in the loss of the real word, the knowledge of occult science. From that time to this, men have ever been in search of the real word, and although but few have been able to regain the knowledge of the true mysteries, others have often caught glimpses of the inner meaning, which is symbolized by the substituted word. That the symbolism is not well understood is evident from the fact that but few Masons, if any, today possess the knowledge and power implied in the symbols and legends of the order. For this reason, only the substitute, monitorial explanation, is given to the neophyte until he, perhaps in future generations, shall find the true word. That Masonry was in search of the meaning of this symbolic word is clearly proven by the insight of the revisionists in 1717 and the fact that symbolic Masonry did not pretend to give the candidate the lost word. They knew that the word was no mere name, but a knowledge of occult science which could only be attained by soul development. Real mastership must again be realized before the lost word can be found, and such realization must of necessity be the experience of each individual brother by whom it is found. The use made of the tradition of the recovery of the lost word and its impartation in the Royal Arch degree shows that the later degree makers little realized the meaning of the symbolism. They mistook the symbol for the thing symbolized. The Royal Arch degree can only give the symbol. The real word, which holds the inner meaning and the power of the symbol, is still a mystery. To understand this mystic symbol and all that it implies is to possess the key to the science of sciences, the real knowledge or word of power. Conclusion. We will now bring this series of lectures to a close. We have seen that Masonry is modeled on the ancient mysteries and derives its important symbols and legends from that source. Is this a mere coincidence? Was there meant to be only a similarity in outward form? We cannot so believe. The analogy is far too close. The men who formulated the ritual very well knew what they were doing. We believe that the secret vaults contain jewels not yet discovered, and it should be the work of every true Mason to search diligently for more light. To discover the full meaning of the glyphs and allegories is to revive the ancient wisdom, the secret doctrine of antiquity, the real lost word. That such wisdom once existed will not be denied by any intelligent Mason, for the whole superstructure of the order is based upon the traditions of its existence. Dr. Buck says, instead of being an imitation of the mysteries of antiquity, Masonry should become their restoration and perpetuation through the coming centuries, not by relaxing its discipline or changing its ritual, but by deepening the learning, intensifying the zeal, and elevating the aim of every brother throughout the world. Mystic Masonry, Buck, page 79. We have seen that the masters of old were true occultists, masters of divine science. Masonry has preserved for us the names that indicate the reality of occult knowledge and power in the perfect and sublime master, Prince Adept, Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret, etc. If these names do not imply that I have suggested they are a mere farce and should be abolished, that they are empty titles today, all will agree, many having recognized this fact, are calling for their abolition. But I hold that instead of abolishing the titles, we should endeavor to make them stand in fact for what in name they indicate. This would be in line with the ancient tradition, a recovery of the real lost word, the key to the science of knowledge. Every Mason should labor assiduously for the realization of this ideal. Let us not be content with the mere rudiments of our philosophy. That skill, says Dr. Mackey, which consists in repeating with fluency and precision the ordinary lectures, in complying with all the ceremonial requisitions of the ritual, or the giving, with sufficient accuracy, the appointed modes of recognition, pertains only to the very rudiments of the Masonic science. Symbolism of Freemasonry, page 310. There are many today who are not satisfied with these preliminary acquirements, and the cry for more light is being heard in every quarter of the Masonic world. Intelligent Masons are beginning to realize that there is something more in our symbols and legends, and they are seeking their inner and ultimate meaning. Let us aid in this work by making our lodges, schools, our labor study, our wages learning. Thus may we attain that knowledge of divine truth which shall truly make us master Masons. So mote it be. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.